Oh my god, that's crazy! Wait, it's Demon Souls! That's Demon Souls. It's Demon Souls!
Visually, Demon Souls Remake is the best looking Souls game to date, and Bluepoint completely crushed all expectations in this department.
Crucially, in each location, these new effects, beautiful lighting, and gorgeous modelling never upend From Software's intent, and in fact, create a truer representation of it.
I'd even go so far as to say I recommend this version pretty easily over the original for newcomers.
In this video, I will categorically prove that Bluepoint's Demon Souls is not only a bad remake, but also an insult to the original and to those who cherish it. I will go over the lore of Demon Souls to explain in detail why the artistic changes made by Bluepoint were misguided at best and disrespectful at worst. But before I talk about Demon Souls, I will briefly disclose why I believe remakes are a cancer to the culture of game development. The current trend of games being remade bases itself on the notion that games are mere products that can be made obsolete. Thus the artistic character of games is less than secondary and not to be respected. This tendency is very similar in nature to the phenomenon of Hollywood remakes. If we are to make a more precise analogy for Bluepoint's Demon Souls, it is like Hollywood acquiring the rights to a foreign work and remaking it with the intent of distorting it and dumbing it down to make it appealing to a mass American audience. Think of the British horror folk masterpiece, The Wicker Man, and its pathetic American remake with Nicolas Cage.
What is that? What is that? What is it? Oh, no, not the beast! Not the beast!
Or of the Korean movie Oldboy and its soulless American counterpart. For Demon Souls and its remake, the situation is substantially worse. The original game is relegated to the PS3, and its servers have been shut down. It has never been ported nor remastered to any modern console. The remake was intended to serve as a replacement, to be the definitive experience for new generations of players who have never touched the original game. And now, if you search for anything Demon Souls related online, the results will be filled with the remake's contents. And whenever you talk about Demon Souls, there are a great deal of people who have played an entirely different game, but have things to say about it. Imagine if whenever you brought up Oldboy, people thought of Spike Lee's remake, and many argued it to be the superior version, claiming that those who defend the integrity of the original movie are nostalgia-fueled purists. Bluepoint's Demon Souls fails to capture the essence of From Software's masterpiece. It is a glorified tech demo for the PS5 that cynically exploits a great work of art for the sake of cheap profits. It is so tone-deaf as to seem like a parody, and that becomes evident just from a glance at the cover art. The composition of the original Japanese cover conveys a deep sense of melancholy. The Western cover arts are also beautiful and elegantly designed. In contrast, the cover art of the remake is downright baffling. The protagonist is posing like an action hero, and an army of plastic toys is cartoonishly antagonizing him. As I respect the intelligence of my viewers, I will not include a long introduction about subjectivity and objectivity, or a disclaimer about this being my opinion, or an explanation as to why I care, or why you should care about art, or why details matter, and so on. The opening cinematic employs the saturated colors to convey a bleak atmosphere. We see a knight get overwhelmed by soul-starved warriors and monsters. He is framed as an underdog. The choreography of the combat is quite graceful and weighty.
I don't know what this is!
Already we can see an obvious tonal shift.
Wait!
The color palette of the remake is bright and excessively vibrant. The environments look stylized in the opposite direction.
Is this Elden?
As is the norm for Bluepoint's soundtrack, the music features an overabundance of obnoxious string build-ups. The hooded figures move like confused zombies. They are like a caricature of cult members from some pulpy comic book. The knight now draws his sword and rushes like a madman. While in the original cinematic, the knight had a more tactical approach to dealing with the wave of enemies. In this version, the choreography is what you'd see in an action blockbuster. The user interface now looks like what you'd expect to see in an ad for a fake mobile game. While the original game's UI had a rusty appearance and was stylistically reminiscent of an old Codex or a dusty, battle-worn blade, the new UI is clean, artificial, and is composed of bland digital boxes and squares with white outlines. Despite the various increments to the character creator, every face looks abominable and belongs in the uncanny valley. The characters look like ungraceful, bug-eyed cartoons and would not feel out of place in a Shrek movie, though they certainly do in Demon Souls. It is as though the developers had the conscious intent of making the characters and faces ugly. It's also worth noting that Bluepoint has deliberately swapped the race of multiple characters in a form of cultural imperialism. To impose the demographic of modern-day America into a fictional setting that was influenced by Eastern and Western Europe and Asia is a way of appropriating or erasing those cultures, and subtly of rewriting history, which is a form of propaganda nearly as old as human civilization. This topic is a taboo for many Americans, who believe they have a moral high ground over other cultures. But despite its controversial nature, I believe it should be pointed out in this comparison. Male has been replaced with body type A, and female with body type B, which, to me, feels dehumanizing. This too is part of a set of rules imposed by American and West European multi-billion-dollar companies onto the global cultural industry for social engineering reasons. The multitude of face and eye tattoos are necessary additions that harm the visual cohesiveness of the setting. As we shall see, the remake has absolutely no visual cohesion, and that has dire implications for the brilliant story that was created for the original game, which is mostly told through visuals and contextual clues. After you create your character, a cutscene that is elegantly presented as a campfire story tells the player of Boletaria and the colorless fog. This introduction is unique even among the games directed by Miyazaki. Like Demon Souls as a whole, it is charming in its own peculiar way. The iconic ambience of the original cutscene was entirely ignored and replaced by people's screams and other messy sound effects.
Boletaria was cut off from the outside world, and those who dared penetrate the deep fog never returned. But Valifax of the royal twin fangs broke free from the fog.
The melancholic track that so beautifully complemented the narration now has an epic, ominous choir detracting from the mood. The entire cutscene sounds cluttered. The last shot of the campfire now has valiant music added on, toning down the ambiguity, which downplays the game's narrative, since that concluding line was foreshadowing to the choice the protagonist must make at the end of the game to either save or destroy the world.
But Boletaria has one final hope. A lone warrior who has braved the baneful fog. Has the land found its savior? Or have the demons found a new slave?
The protagonist begins his journey by walking through the colorless fog.
Brave soul who fears not death. I shall guide you.
The Monumento telepathically guides him towards the light.
So that you may lull the old one back to slumber.
Once again, the sound design has been butchered. The ethereal atmosphere is no more. The ominous noise of the fog is gone, and in its place is a thunderstorm. The fissure is now summoned by a purple thunderbolt, and the portal looks like something out of Fortnite, and sounds like something out of a science fiction movie. Right after spawning, we can see an iconic landmark in the distance. The scenery is astounding, and was carefully designed to tell a story. These are the ruins of an old Myrden temple. It has not been properly maintained for centuries, which is why there is overgrown vegetation everywhere. As a result of the First Scourge, man had to banish an entire portion of the world, the epicenter of the Myrden Empire, to an astral prison to seal the old one. This Myrden temple is located near the edge of the void that was left by that event, and is now occupied by Boletarian troops. It is significant that the game's ending sequence takes place at the same location where it started. The remake discarded the framing of the starting area. The Mirrodin Temple looks vastly different. The architecture in From Software games is crucial to their storytelling. The developers of the remake were preposterous enough to believe they should change everything to fit their arbitrary criteria of what looks appealing to a modern audience, disregarding the meticulously crafted world of the original. In this case, the Mirrodin architecture has a very specific look to it, and when it is replaced with generic Gothic architecture, that deliberate part of the world's design is lost. There are random fires everywhere for seemingly no reason. There's one single tree on fire near the first Archstone of the tutorial area. It looks jarring and stupid. Speaking of Archstones, they were also redesigned to look like Diablo props. In the original game, the Archstones are shaped like the head of a Baku, a creature from Japanese mythology. Baku are dream-eating magical creatures who are often said to protect against pestilence and evil. Legend has it that children can call out to Baku to have it eat their nightmares, granting them a peaceful night of sleep. Though their nature is dualistic, and they may also devour hopes and desires. The Archstones mend the fabric of reality and connect the spirit world with the physical plane. The Stones of Ephemeral Eyes, items that can restore the physical body of a wandering spirit, as well as the other Eye Stones, items that can connect the player to other worlds, all base their designs on the Baku myth. Bluepoint completely ignores the esoteric cultural references of the original design of the Archstones and the other Eye Stones and decided to remake them as generic props. The Archstones now look like the skull of a demon from Doom. And of course it's on fire, why wouldn't it be? The Eye Stones are all simply generic, mystic-looking minerals. The white Eye Stone is now a literal white stone. The blue Eye Stone is now a literal blue stone, and so on. The Stone of Ephemeral Eyes, which used to be a cracked Archstone, is now a cracked lapis lazuli. As is above, so is below. The lack of attention to detail is often symptomatic of a work that is corrupted in its entirety.
Bosses are treated with the same kind of care, either true to the original or changed to more closely embody the spirit of it. The Vanguard looks less like one of those rubber monsters in my pocket toys from the 90s and more like a disgusting demonic executioner. But what makes it special is how Bluepoint has applied its own creative vision to From Software's original to remake the game not just as it was, but as it was meant to be, realizing its full potential. The result is a title that pays homage to From Software's work. Even the people who occupy the Nexus have more detail, which in turn gives them greater depth. Bluepoint has taken From Software's original game and expressed it in a richer, fuller way.
Obviously, some fans may object to specific changes here and there, but Bluepoint has once again delivered a superb remake that stays faithful to the original. Bluepoint sticks close to the source material with Demon Souls.
Right, so the art style itself is obviously a bit more realistic, trying to be more realistic. So when you have a Vanguard who's kind of designed to be a little funny, comical, right? You know, like a lot of the stuff's kind of tongue-in-cheek, so you have to make some slight changes, right?
You know, when you do a remake, it's not what the player, actually played, it's how they remembered the game. And you're always trying to build the game to their expectations. And their memories of the game are far better than the game ever was.
Each map of Demon Souls tells a story, and the tutorial area is no exception. It is implied that the soul-starved soldiers and knights of this outpost are being mind-controlled by the Vanguard, a demon that embodies the bloodlust of men. They are killing and abducting those who cross the fog and boiling them in a massive cauldron to make human soup to feed the Vanguard. Despite looking like a brutish, mindless monster at first glance, the Vanguard is more akin to a Lovecraftian entity, and that is subtly communicated by the ominous glow of its huge alien-like eyes, as well as by the presence of a third eye on its forehead, which can be interpreted as a symbol of enlightenment. Of course, the uncanny, detached expression of the Vanguard has turned into an angry grin. Its eyes are smaller and the glow they emit is nearly red, just to make sure the player knows it's evil. Its eldritch character is gone. It is now a disgusting looking, gruesome, orcish monster, whose body is covered in blobs of pus, holes, and spikes. It has become so obese that its neck is covered by fat. In the remake, the cauldron is filled with dead rats, implying the soul-starved humans were literally starving and had to resort to cooking rat meat. The sound design of this remake is awfully overdone and artificial. The player character, as well as the enemies, annoyingly grunt when performing attacks. The lighting of the arena has also been altered to make the scene superficially darker and scarier. The peculiar yellow gloom of the original made it look distinct and created a nice contrast with the Vanguard's shadowy figure. It's easy to notice the appalling overuse of complementary color schemes in this game.
Before I go any further, I would like to talk a little bit about the prevalence of the orange and teal color scheme that has dominated mainstream cinema and related advertising materials over the last decade, and is now creeping into the art design of gaming as well. In this adaptation of an in-game cutscene from the Tower of Latria, the gargoyles descend, their eyes glowing orange, another example of the exaggerated orange and teal color scheme. We start to see even more orange in the glowing candles around the altar. Compare this to the original. The candles produce an appropriate color temperature, and all the light is realistically sourced from elements within the scene. There's a beam of light coming through a stained glass window, but instead of beaming directly through the window, it's aiming at an impossible angle, creating an artificial stage light for the night. As a result, the scene feels overly staged and stylized. Despite the fact that candles are lighting the room, the colors are inverted from what they should be, and the room is largely teal.
If you manage to defeat the Vanguard in one shot, you are rewarded with access to an area that is filled with extra loot before a mandatory death sequence that transports you to the Nexus. It was like a little bonus to skilled newcomers and returning players. In the remake, however, if you simply buy the digital deluxe edition of the game that costs $30 additional, you start the game with 20,000 souls, as well as with a special ring that grants you extra health, 2 exclusive armor sets, an exclusive weapon and shield, and a bunch of upgrade materials.
I'm now pre-order man. I paid an extra $20 to have access to this gear. Look at me.
As previously mentioned, the remake is obsessed with highly saturated complementary color schemes, especially the viral combination of orange and teal that plagues nearly every American blockbuster since the early 2010s. This gives it the foul look of Hollywood slop. Nearly every area blends together because of it. The Nexus is graded exactly like the Prison of Hope, and like Upper Latria, and like the Stonefang Tunnel, and like the Shrine of Storms, and so on. Every map lost its identity and charm. The art direction of the remake has way more in common with generic, hyper-commercial, soulless IPs like Raid Shadow Legends, Dungeons & Dragons, League of Legends, Fortnite, the MCU, and etc. than it does with the original Demon Souls. It is an aesthetic disaster. Most of the artists hired by Bluepoint have worked for such IPs in the past, as their portfolios show. Bluepoint's concept art demonstrates that the main sources of inspiration for the artists were, in fact, sloppy Western movies and video games. Bluepoint was not satisfied with the artistic vision that was carefully and masterfully designed by the talented Japanese artists along with Miyazaki himself. They wanted to modernize and westernize Demon Souls to the extreme, desecrating it in the process. They claimed that, and I quote, "They wanted to dream big about how the original team would have imagined the game if they could have designed it around the PS5, all rooted in their study of the original game's concept art, meaning they looked at the work of the Japanese artists, thought it looked goofy and simplistic as a result of the graphical limitations of the technology of the time, and believes they could improve upon it, to, according to them, make it more realistic. It's clear that they not only underestimated the intent and artistry of Demon Souls, but also that they lacked the intellect and cultural background required to grasp its nuance and complexity. But it gets worse. According to Lance McDonald, a Souls YouTuber, Bluepoint thought that the world's design of Demon Souls contradicts its own story, and that it does not look sinister enough. They wanted to make it look like Bloodborne. They arrogantly believed they knew better than the original team. The PR statements made by Bluepoint are particularly funny when you compare the concept art they claim to have designed by studying what the characters were meant to be in the original game, and by studying the original concepts with From Software's. The Nexus is an ancient Mirdan temple that was reappropriated to host the monumentals and the Archstones that mans the ruined world. The artists who worked on the remake decided to rework the materials of the temple to exhibit an absurd degree of polish, despite the only servants of the temple being the blind candle maiden who, besides aiding the slayer of demons, only tends to the flames. Instead of looking ancient and forgotten, the remake's temple looks like it gets cleaned regularly by a squad of janitors. The remake's Boletarian palace looks nothing like the original. The architecture that was utilitarian in design is now seemingly made to resemble a Disney castle with a ridiculous amount of meaningless ornamentation. This not only implies that it was built centuries after the original design, but also denotes a more pompous culture that directly contradicts the story of the region. Boletaria was founded by a barbarian warrior who became a king through might, a shadow man who led the Mirdan people against the demonic wyverns of the First Scourge. His lineage is one of warrior kings, and even Allant, a man with a gentle soul, was forced to enact this role, and that contributed to him spiraling into depression and corruption. The Boletarian palace was built after an apocalypse that destroyed most of human civilization. The ostentatious look it has in the remake is completely nonsensical. The mausoleum that hosts the remains of the first Boletarian king, Old King Doran, has turned into a Gothic church. The statue that portrays Doran's original appearance as a civilized barbarian, with his wild, long hair and wearing a Latrian armor set, denoting his political affiliation, has been remodeled to depict a generic late medieval king. The Boletarian mausoleum that hosts the remains of Doran is, in the remake, neither Boletarian, nor a mausoleum, nor does it host the remains of the old king. The Boletarian palace map is covered by overgrown foliage. This too makes no sense, since the Second Scourge began a few months, or, at most, around a couple of years before the beginning of the game, and Boletaria was, up until that point, experiencing a period of unprecedented prosperity. There is more overgrown vegetation in the Boletarian palace area than in the tutorial area, despite that region being one of the few places in the original that was overrun by nature, because it had been ruined and stood abandoned for centuries. The soul arts are based on the emancipation of the human mind. Magic can originate from either the study of nature and man's consciousness, or from their feelings and unconsciousness. Through man's abuse of the powers of the soul, the Old One awoke from its slumber and granted agency to mankind's darkest thoughts and desires, birthing the demons. The fog that then embraced the world would disrupt nature and incite every living thing to feed on souls. That's what it means to be demonic, to greedily steal the souls of others. The powers and properties of most demons are tied to the collective of the human mind. Many demons are born from egregories, as in, they are given shape by symbols, ideas, or ideals that exist in the collective psyche of man. It's important to note that souls are amplified by human perception. The consumable souls we get are specifically ranked with descriptors that denote not the strength of its previous owner, such as mighty or powerful, but with those which denote acclaim and adoration. The lesser souls are those of unknown soldiers and heroes. The heftier ones are those of storied, renowned, and legendary soldiers and heroes. The archdemons owe their vast power to their prominent egregory, which have been fermented in mass by the minds of men. In summary, some demons are born out of egregories. Some demons were previously men or beasts that were corrupted by egregories, or by the excessive consumption of souls. And some demons are created by individuals through magic rituals. Does the remake take any of this into account when redesigning every enemy and boss, Of course not. They completely alters the visuals of many of them, with zero consideration for their purpose, while claiming that their product is faithful to the original game. The most important qualities of Demon's Souls are its artistry and its story, and both go together. It is impossible to create a faithful remake of Demon's Souls if its essential character is fundamentally distorted. There is a tragically hilarious quote by Gavin Moore, the director of the Demon's Souls remake, about this very topic. Quote, "When we're doing a remake, we identify what the core is of the game, what is most important to that game. As for us, with Demon's Souls that has to be the gameplay logic and the AI, so then we pare everything else away. That's the heart and soul of the game. And when we start building up everything around the game, all new models, all new character designs, taking everything back up to the drawing board and building it back up. This makes it remarkably clear that Bluepoint did not understand what made Demon's Souls special at all. Yes, the gameplay is integral to the experience, but saying the art and world of Demon's Souls can be remade from scratch with no harm to its heart and soul is beyond ignorant. It is an insult to Miyazaki, and to the artists who worked on the original game, and to the fans who love it. Would anyone in their right mind claim that the heart and soul of the Sistine Chapel lies in its proportions, and so it is fine if its frescoes are painted over, and its architectural style is entirely modernized? I will not cover every minute change of each design, though I will say all of them were for the worse, and were done arbitrarily. For example, there was no reason to make the inner soul of the Phalanx demon a neon green instead of the bluish white that is more commonly associated with souls in the original game. Especially considering there is a very subtle parallel between the design of the Phalanx demon and the old one, with the interior of both being a soul that is covered by branch-like appendages. The fat officials are based on the wicked nature of Boletaria's politicians, jailers, colonial officers, and executioners. Their appearance reflects their true character, which was brought to the surface by the powers of the fog. Their bodies are bloated, their faces disfigured. They compulsively laugh as they perform sadistic acts, as if they are caricatures of their human counterparts. In the remake, however, they are simply caricatures of obese men who look mildly annoyed or perhaps painfully constipated. As expected, the artists at Bluepoint felt the need to cover them in pustules and to expose their huge bellies. The deep meaning behind their appearances has been lost. The cutscene that introduces the Tower Knights depicts a microcosmical allegory of the degeneration of Boletaria. A crooked, sadistic politician stands before the figure of a mighty, noble warrior and laughs as he orders the knights and the soldiers to slay the protagonist of the story. Boletaria was founded upon the heroic deeds of a mighty warrior, and its culture was shaped around ideals of chivalry. Its downfall came from the exploitation and corruption of these ideals by the crooked politicians who de facto rule over the kingdom. Because of them, the once industrious and humble kingdom of Boletaria has turned into an expansionistic empire that feeds itself through slavery and conquest. The disgusting demons of the remake go explicitly against Miyazaki's design philosophy. Quote, "I always try to maintain a certain level of refinement and elegance in all designs. I often told the artist that muddy or messy is definitely not good. If you asked me to describe what this elegance is, I think you just have to look at the designs and judge for yourself, but it really is one of the most important factors in everything I oversee. The art direction of the remake is so ugly and depraved, it honestly feels to me as if the artists who worked on it read this quote and deliberately chose to not simply ignore it, but to go in the opposite direction." The Penetrator was born out of an egregore. He embodies the figure of a glorious knight who fights as Boletaria's sword. The statue of the Penetrator that stands at the gate of the royal palace is likely a romanticized depiction of Metas, a knight of the Round Table. The same is true for the Tower Knight, who is a romanticized depiction of Alfred. As such, the Penetrator demon looks and fights like the ideal knight. Despite having been manifested as a demon, the Penetrator's duty remains the same. He loyally serves Boletaria. The remake's Penetrator is, instead, an edgy, evil-looking dark knight who wields a black sword enchanted with blood magic. And now, the Penetrator has been divorced from Metas. We can loot the armor of the Penetrator from a random body. Metas appears as a dark phantom wearing an entirely different armor set. King Allant was utterly emasculated by the remake. His facial proportions are almost childlike, and his skin is unnaturally smooth for his age, giving the uncanny feeling that he is old and young at the same time, like a bug-eyed Benjamin Button. His mustache is absent, and his hair is shorter and silkier. His head looks too small for his body, and his arms too big. His kingly attire, that in the original is a perfect blend of royal garb and military uniform, now looks deflated. Somehow, Bluepoint managed to ruin even the brief choreography of this scene. Allant now flamboyantly swings his arms to detach his cape from his back, as though he is overacting for a comedy sketch. In the original Demon's Souls, King Allant looks like an old, imposing warrior king who has been scarred by the horrors of war, both physically and mentally. In the remake, he looks like the punchline of a bad joke. In ancient times, miners found the fossils of gigantic creatures of times past within the deeper layers of the caves, and stories of mythical dragons were incorporated into their culture. They excavated a temple as a means of sealing and worshipping what they believed to be dragon bones. Ages later, as the slave miners of Stonefang came into contact with the powers of the fog, reptilian scales began to grow on their bodies, which became increasingly deformed, and their souls were slowly drained, rendering them mindless. Their appearance was influenced by the egregory that was made manifest by the colorless fog, and its culmination is the archdemon of Stonefang, the dragon god. In the remake, the miners look like goblins.
You take the Flamelurker and you take the model, and you look at the original PS3 model, and there's details there, but there's a lot of not details there. And so when you look at it on the PS3, I feel like your eye, naturally makes up, you look at something, you see some shading, you see some light, you see some things, and then your eye sort of fills in the details and so on. But when you actually get up to the model, it's just not there. It's like you want to see something better than what it really is. And so when we start working on those models, it's like, well, what are they trying to do here? I don't know. We looked at the model, we looked at what it needed to do in the level, how it needed to behave, and came up, with what we felt like, here's a great interpretation. It might not be, triangle for triangle accurate to what the original was, because that's not what we're trying to do. And at the end, you just kind of gotta let go and say, I think this is the best thing for the game.
This is the most notable example of the remake having a struggle with the design. There was a lot of backlash over its appearance in the announcement trailer, where a few character details were completely missing. The general concern from fans was that it was replaced with something more generic. What seems most likely, in my opinion, is that they chose to ignore those details because they found them weird. I think the intention was to make him less goofy, so they purposefully cut the details they found awkward, making the argument that there weren't enough details in the original ring a bit hollow. I think they just kind of danced around admitting that they simply didn't like it, and they trusted themselves to make something that looked tougher and more menacing. There's another detail that didn't survive either of their new iterations, which are these growths on the back. If we really wanted to nitpick, we could point out how there's also stuff like these pads on the bottom of his feet. There's a bunch of details that the original offered, so framing the problem as a lack of detail just doesn't work for me. I'm not convinced by that explanation.
The remake's Flamelurker 2 looks disconnected from his counterpart. The original Demon's Souls, Flamelurker's arena is the ancient temple that was excavated to host the dragon bones by miners of yore. And the boss had spawned from the egregory of Big M, one of the heroes who fought against the demons of the First Scourge. He is also the founder of the Burrower Kingdom of Stonefang. Big M was a blacksmith who employed the soul arts to both strengthen himself and to craft magical weapons fit for demon slaying. He crafted the Dragon Bone Smasher, an excessively big, enchanted sword which requires inhuman strength to be wielded, and grants its wielder resistance against fire. He brandished his massive swords to slay the demonic dragons, and his prowess was deified by legend. He'd be remembered as a man so strong he could kill dragons with his fists. A flaming altar would be built in his honor, and his sword was stored as a precaution, should the dragons rise once again. As generations went by, the banishment of the soul arts caused the descendants of the miners to forget about the practicality of the sword, thinking that it was too big, too thick, too heavy, and too rough. The legend of the Big M began to be interpreted literally, as it adapted to their limited perception. They thought of the Big M as a man who killed dragons with his hands and shaped their culture around this idealization. They crafted the hands of God, weapons that require great strength and faith to be used effectively, as an homage to their deific ancestor. The Flamelurker was born out of this egregiory and spawned from the flaming altar dedicated to Big M, the name Flamelurker being a literal descriptor. Additionally, it's interesting to note that the explosions the Flamelurker triggers with his punches mirror the explosions caused by the concentration of souls within the ores found in Stonefang, and his rounded head is similar to the round, crown-like hat of the Burrower King as featured on the Archstone. In the remake, the Flamelurker's arena was redesigned to look like a dungeon from Raid Shadow Legends. It isn't a temple that was excavated in ancient times by superstitious miners as a means of sealing what they saw as magical dragon bones. The remake's Flamelurker is much blender in appearance as well. Before the game's release, the design they went with was even more generic. Bluepoint only changed it because it was showcased in a trailer and people complained it looked nothing like the original. The revised version, however, still lacks identity and purpose. The original design featured a muscular body. After all, the demon is based on the legendary Big M, a hero who is a symbol of masculinity and toughness. The new design has a body made of rock. It is a simple lava demon that could be ported over to World of Warcraft or any other mainstream Western fantasy IP and fits in perfectly. Its proportions are more cartoonish, and the bald head that was a reference to the Burrower King is less prominent and is constantly on fire. The original design had similarities with the Dragon God. The remake's design does not. The connection between the Flamelurker's punches and the soulful ores of Stonefang has been lost, as the explosions caused by him in the remake look completely different. The magic ballistas of the interior of the temple were changed from human constructs to alien, semi-organic, H.R. Geiger-looking structures. These weapons were built by the Myrdans with the use of soul arts to fight the demons of the First Scourge. They would not have bothered to embellish them to this extent, since they were most likely built amidst the spread of the fog. As is customary, the remake ignores the story told by the original. Latria is the area that suffers the stupidest changes of all. What was once the most sinister and bleak area of any From Software game to date has been reduced to a glorified theme park ride. Latria's sound design was one of its most iconic assets. Latria is one of the quieter maps of the game. The constant noise of insects buzzing is only disturbed by tortured screams of prisoners, and by the bells of the demonic jailers who roam the corridors of the ironically named Prison of Hope. In the remake, the player is immediately greeted by a lullaby that is a rendition of the theme that plays after the good ending of the game, for no reason other than self-referential nostalgia baiting. The atmosphere of the area was ruined by this change alone, yet that is simply the tip of the iceberg. The oppressively practical architecture of the Prison of Hope has been beautified and cleaned up. The rusty railings have been polished to a T, and each spike was painstakingly embellished. The messy brick walls were rebuilt with an immaculate finish, and the floor now exhibits an ornate pattern. Someone at Bluepoint decided that the soul-starved prisoners of Latria would look better if they had regular human faces, and so they went from looking like hollows from Dark Souls to looking like crackheads with excessively shiny skin. The black prisoners are particularly strange. Bluepoint didn't bother to make different models for them, so only their faces are dark-skinned. Now for a bit of context. Latria is a land that can be characterized by the study of the soul arts. After the First Scourge, man banished the soul arts, and the Prison of Hope was built to jail those who engaged in heretical studies of the soul. But the royals of Latria kept practicing them from the shadows, following the tradition of their ancestors, and organized secret masked meetings at the Queen's throne room. They maintained their production of spice, a commodity that helps stimulate the mind, and is noteworthy for its magic-aiding properties, and possibly justified it by claiming to benefit from its practical purpose as a regular sort of spice. The Queen of Latria herself was a prodigal sorcerer, as the Soul Ray sorcery discloses. This secret society of Latrian nobles would murder any person who was outside its ranks and knew of soul arts, hiring assassins and mercenaries, occasionally engaging in murder themselves. After the banishment of the soul arts, the queen was not revered as a talented sorcerer, but as a religious saint due to the influence of the Church of God. But that was merely a sham to hide their transgressions against international law. When the old monk had his revenge against the royals of Latria, the queen, its greatest authority and the greatest of deceivers, was the one he chose the harshest sentence for. He'd abduct and murder her, and make a doll out of her pale corpse, revive her through necromantic magic, and command her to eternally punish the convicts of the prison of hope, as an ironic mockery of her hypocrisy. The church where the fool's idol resides was built in times past to convert those who engaged in heretical studies of the soul. This purpose is what earns the complex its name, Prison of Hope. But during the old monk's rule, the path to the church was filled with various obstacles, and escapees would have to engage in a game of death and torture to attempt to reach a deceiving salvation and ascend to the upper strata of Latria. In the remake, the fool's idol looks like a goth girl. The beams of holy light that shone upon the church as she descends from the heavens are gone, as is the religious chant that announces her arrival. Her serene expression has been changed into an exaggerated rage face, and her proportions are less delicate. The Maneaters share a design trend with the demonic silverfish of Upper Latria. The Maneaters are the queen's advisors, while the demonic silverfish were corrupt aristocrats. The old monk fed them to the yellow womb demon, and they were reborn as chimeric abominations. The petrified faces of the demons reflect the spiritual desecration faced by the old monk's victims. The remake redesigns them to have mutilated zombie faces instead, emphasizing physical torture. The faces were manually sewn onto the monstrous silverfish body, which does not make sense. The ridiculous size of the heads is also illogical in the updated design, since they were supposed to have belonged to actual human beings, while in the original design, the petrified faces did not. They were physical manifestations of spirits that were fused together into the body of a giant insect through dark magic. Bluepoint added an orange moon to Upper Latria to achieve that comically overused complementary color scheme. The improvised flags made from stripes of the demonic yellow robe that announced the old monk's rule over the region were replaced by random assets that serve zero purpose. The gargoyles of Upper Latria too were tortured souls. The warriors who rebelled against the old monk's rule had their souls transposed into statues. The various nails piercing their heads indicates that the ritual was quite painful. The distressed expression of the original statues is, ironically, an accurate representation of the state of the souls they now bear within them. In the remake, they look like the gargoyle characters from Disney's Hunchback of Notre Dame. The evil ritual of the old monk has left no trace. There are no nails on their heads. The horrific face of the original design has been turned into a playful tongue-out emoji. The shamans from the Shrine of Storms are not shadow men anymore. They are stereotypical Grim Reapers. The sacred white water that runs through the temple, which is filled with the souls of the fallen warriors that were ceremoniously buried there, was recolored to a neon teal in a desperate attempt by Bluepoint to turn the shrine's color scheme into slop. The designs of the Adjudicator and the old hero are narratively tied, so I will talk about the lore that informs them both before comparing them to their remake counterparts. The old hero is the spirit of a mighty berserker warrior of the past that was conjured by the powers of the old one. His gravely scarred body shows that he was part of countless battles. The name of his sword of searching denotes that he was eager to reach the heavens, as the storms he searched for are allegorical. However, he was greedy, and from his eating of bird flesh, he was severely punished. They mutilated his lips as an omen of his greed, and blinded him so that he could never find the heavens, and his soul would keep searching for eternity. The eating of bird flesh also serves as an allegory for cannibalism, with proud, worthy warriors symbolically turning into birds after an honorable death in battle to reach the heavens. This explains his enormous size, which is the result of eating the flesh of his fallen foes to steal their might, a great taboo for the Shadowmen. He shares many traits with the Adjudicator. Their jewelry is nearly identical. They have no flesh around their mouths. They are massive in size and wield gigantic weapons. It's likely that the old hero was the inspiration for the Adjudicator, a mighty but greedy warrior who ended up as a servant to the Golden Crow, a bird deity. The Golden Crow would weaponize his greedy nature, allowing him to eat those who acted cowardly in battle and did not deserve to reach the storms. The old hero is a tragic figure. Upon the death of his spirit, he howls at the sky one last time. The remake's Adjudicator is a grotesque abomination. He lost his regal look. Miyazaki employs in his games a very specific design language to portray gluttonous and greedy creatures. In Dark Souls, the cannibal cleric Aldrich devoured so many humans that he bloated like a pig and turned into slime. The same is true for the Adjudicator. His bloated, slimy body is representative of his gluttony. In the remake, however, his skin isn't shiny and sludgy, but rough and decrepit. They felt the need to add realistic folds to his fat belly, as well as giant man-teeth on his chest, when the original design's anatomy was misshapen on purpose. His ornate accessories are simplified, as though Bluepoint wanted to make him look more like an obese, savage barbarian zombie, and not like a deity that belongs to an ancient pagan culture. The tribal tattoos were erased for no reason at all. The crown was reduced in size, which detracts from the silhouette of the design. The glow emitted by the golden crow was neutered, further weakening his divine character. The old hero looks like a racist caricature of an indigenous warrior. The Celtic tattoos look out of place. He appears weak and frail in comparison to the original, and his once subtle glow has been saturated to the point where he looks not like the disturbed spirit of a fallen hero, but like a Simpsons character. He now goofily screams in rage whenever he attacks. Pair that habit with his visuals and he ends up seeming like a sadistic bad guy. The aura of mystery that surrounded the original old hero is not present in the remake. The cutscene that introduces the Storm King was stripped of its mythical aura. The way the camera stood mostly still and distant as the Storm King descends from the tempestuous landscape was integral to the portrayal of the demon as an alien god of legends. In the remake, the camera angle emphasizes his speed instead, and looks unremarkable in comparison. The remake's Storm King is constantly covered in shadow, and the nuances of his design can barely be seen. The picturesque beams of light that give this scene its fantastical flavor are nearly absent. The new backstab and riposte animations look way over the top. The original animations are elegant and restrained, as they should be. After all, the protagonist is meant to be portrayed as a blank slate, not a bloodthirsty maniac.
That's so fucking cool! Oh my god, it's not over yet!
The animations for when the character performs a miracle were changed. In the original, the character held a talisman and performed a prayer motion to conjure them. The people who did the animations for the remake clearly did not grasp that simple detail.
Wait, I gotta get a funny screenshot for Twitter, man. You guys are gonna join me on this. We're gonna get some retweets, okay, chat?
A photo mode was added alongside a feature to pose the player character for pictures. While the photo mode by itself isn't particularly degrading, it does contribute to the commercialized feel of the remake, and it enables extremely degenerate scenarios. Demon's Souls is not the type of game that benefits from a selfie feature. The reworked visual effects look jarring. For example, when fire touches a set of planks, they immediately and cartoonishly combust. The same is true for when an enemy is struck by fire. They instantly turn into human charcoal for a couple seconds, and then reverse to normal. The sound effects that accompany the new visual effects sound like they belong to a sci-fi blockbuster. The spells in particular sound like sci-fi blasters. As is the case with every artistic element of the game, the designs of many characters are stripped of their charm and intent. For example, the old King Doran we meet in-game wears his burial armor. As previously explained, in life he fought as a barbarian warrior. The ancient king's set is not the practical suit of armor he wore to fight against the demons, but the armor his body was posthumously dressed in to glorify his figure in death, and portray him as the regal ruler he became or was iconized as. The powers of the fog caused him to rise from the dead in his mausoleum. His design in the remake does not reflect that at all, and his armor looks less like an ornate ritualistic set. To be blunt, it looks ugly and silly, while still somehow looking less practical, with his chest piece barely covering his trunk. The leather belts over the waist piece clearly show the developers did not understand the purpose behind the original design in the slightest, but still decided they should improve it. Mephistopheles looks less like she is a member of an occult secret society of nobles, and more like she belongs to the Thieves Guild of the Elder Scrolls Online. The gold mask she wears had, in the original game, an appearance that is referenced by the design of another member of that occult organization, the once royal mistress. Her face was disfigured by the old monk. It's as though the gold mask melted onto her flesh, a highly symbolic punishment, as is the rule for his demonic retribution upon the corrupt nobles of Latria. In the remake, she is simply a grotesque zombie-looking woman.
When you're creating a score from scratch, you have a blank canvas and anything is possible. With Demon's Souls, it was a little bit different challenge. We already had a score, so the challenge that's there is to be true to that material and to make the reimagination of that score be true to the original composer's intent.
The lore of the game really does help in the creation of the score. So we've worked with the director of the game, Gavin Moore, on the lore of each character and each boss.
Certainly Bloodborne has informed this project to some extent in terms of the scale of the sound and the combination of choir and orchestra.
The soul of the music that's in the original game is still there.
The claims made by the producers of the remake's soundtrack should honestly be insulting to the intelligence of those with functioning ears. In this section, I will conclusively disprove their absurd PR statements. This is the original theme for the Nexus. It's a very subtle background track that fits the melancholic tone of the area perfectly. Note the delicate use of silence. The introspective nature of the song is meant to evoke serenity, and it serves to masterfully immerse the player in the Nexus. The new track starts with a big choir. It's made to sound grandiose. The tone is entirely different. This is the original theme for the Old Monk. The fight it was composed for is very unconventional, so the peculiar structure of the song is utterly fitting. In this part, the track begins a build-up that seems to foreshadow its climax. However, the payoff subverts your expectations and mocks you. This reflects the nature of the demonic yellow robe, the actual mastermind behind the malice of Latria, who fooled the old monk and exploited his desire for retribution against his enemies. The new version again starts with an epic choir. The choir is followed by a nauseating string build-up that leads to tumultuous drumming and louder vocals. Aside from sounding nothing like it should when considering the context it plays in, the track is obnoxious from start to finish. And this is the trend for every piece of the remake's soundtrack. The demon you fight while listening to this track, the Dirty Colossus, is a golem made by the depraved ones to protect Maiden Astrea. The golem was put together with junk and filth. Its creators made it a face by cutting up a sack in the shape of a grimace, to give the pitiful thing a more menacing look. As expected, its theme reflects its design, enrolling the story. It manages to sound both silly and scary at the same time. The remake's version of this theme sounds more somber, and less than a minute in, a choir shows up to bombard your ears with epicness. The theme of False King Allant was, in the original, a restrained piece that featured a lone organ. It perfectly represented the fallen king of Boletaria, the nihilistic warrior that felt demonic temptation. That ruminating song was flipped upside down and turned into overbearing, choir-filled slop. For a final example, this is the original theme of the Maneaters. This is the remake's version of the theme. I will allow the song to speak for itself. The original soundtrack is one of the best and most iconic of the entire medium. Each piece exudes personality and elegance, and serves to elevate the scene it was designed for to perfection. Even among the excellent scores of From Software games, it stands out. The remake soundtrack is the absolute antithesis of the original. The songs are generic, loud, chaotic, and aggressive. Not even one preserves the identity of its counterpart. They sound borderline parodical. I hope to have convinced you that Bluepoint's Demon's Souls is not a good remake, and to have demonstrated why I and many passionate fans are bitter about its existence. Demon's Souls is my favorite game of all time and means a lot to me. I am worried that it will be forgotten in the future, and that its American remake will replace it in the minds of the collective. There is a real possibility that the original game will neither get ported nor remastered to future consoles, since the remake is seen by many as the definitive version of Demon's Souls, and was marketed as such, and that is a depressing thought. As a final message to those who appreciate Demon's Souls, I recommend you to watch my previous video about its story. That video is a result of a decade's worth of playthroughs and introspection, and I am quite proud of it, despite the technical issues it has. It is a definitive guide to the lore of Demon's Souls, and will certainly make you appreciate the game more and see it differently. I sincerely thank you for watching, and I hope you have enjoyed this video.